I didn't flinch when my brother's lawyer called me a thief. I didn't cry when my own mother testified that I'd manipulated our dying father. I just sat there, hands folded in my lap, watching my family try to take everything I'd sacrificed 10 years of my life to protect. My name is Rebecca Hayes. I'm 41 years old, and until 6 months ago, I was a registered nurse at St. Mary's Hospital in Denver. I had a career I loved, a small apartment I was proud of, and a life that was finally mine. Then my father got sick, and everything changed. Dad was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer in March of 2023. The doctors gave him 6 months, maybe a year with treatment. My mother couldn't handle it. She'd always been fragile, the type of woman who needed someone else to make every decision, and my father's illness shattered what little strength she had. My brother Michael lived in California with his tech startup and his picture-perfect family. He visited twice in those first 3 months. Twice. So I moved home. I took a leave of absence from work, gave up my apartment, and moved into my childhood bedroom to take care of the man who'd taught me how to ride a bike, who'd walked me down the aisle at my wedding before it fell apart, who'd told me I was strong enough to start over. Those 10 years people talk about flying by, they don't. Not when you're changing adult diapers at 3 a.m, not when you're crushing pills into applesauce because your father can't swallow anymore. Not when you're watching the strongest man you've ever known fade into someone who can't remember your name. Michael sent money. I'll give him that. A check every month with a note that said for Dad's care. But money doesn't hold your father's hand during chemo. Money doesn't sing him the songs he taught you when you were 6. Money doesn't cry with him when he tells you he's scared of dying. Dad held on for 3 years. 3 years longer than any doctor predicted. Mom said it was because I wouldn't let him go. That I was selfish for keeping him alive when he was suffering. Maybe she was right. Or maybe he knew that the moment he closed his eyes for the last time, everything would fall apart. He died on a Tuesday morning in October. I was holding his hand. Mom was at her book club. Michael was on a business trip in Singapore. The will reading was 2 weeks later. My father's attorney, Bernard Hutchinson, had been a family friend for 30 years. He was the one who taught me how to play chess when I was 12. He looked uncomfortable as he read the document aloud. The house went to me. The life insurance policy, split between Mom and Michael, Dad's investment accounts, most of which had been drained paying for experimental treatments, went to me. His vintage car collection, 7 vehicles he'd restored himself, went to me. The vacation property in Aspen, where we'd spent every summer of my childhood, went to me. Michael's face turned purple. Mom started crying. I just felt numb. There's a letter, Bernard said quietly, pulling out an envelope. Gerald asked me to read this aloud. The letter explained everything. Dad had rewritten his will 6 months before he died, when he was still lucid enough to make legal decisions. He'd watched Michael disappear after those first visits. He'd watched Mom refuse to help with his care, claiming it was too hard to see him like that. And he'd watched me give up everything to make sure he wasn't alone. Rebecca sacrificed her life for mine, the letter said. She deserves to rebuild what she gave up. Michael and Margaret will be fine. They've always been fine. But Rebecca needs this. She's earned it. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Michael contested the will 3 weeks later. He hired a lawyer from his firm in San Francisco, a woman named Patricia Chen who specialized in estate litigation. The lawsuit claimed that I'd manipulated Dad while he was mentally incapacitated, that I'd isolated him from the rest of the family, that I'd used undue influence to change his will. Mom backed him up. My own mother signed an affidavit stating that I'd kept her away from Dad, that I'd turned him against her, that I'd poisoned his mind in his final months. It wasn't true. None of it was true. But suddenly, I was the villain in a story I didn't even recognize. The court date was set for April 15th, 2024, probate court in downtown Denver. I couldn't afford a lawyer, not a good one anyway. I'd spent what little savings I had on Dad's funeral. Bernard offered to represent me pro bono, but he was an estate attorney, not a litigator. He was kind, but he was out of his depth. I spent the weeks leading up to the trial trying to gather evidence. I had my father's medical records, showing the decline in his cognitive function and proving he'd been mentally sound when he changed the will. I had receipts for everything I'd paid for, every medication, every medical device. I had a notebook where I'd tracked his symptoms, his good days and bad days, his moments of clarity. What I didn't have were witnesses. The people who'd seen me care for Dad were gone. His hospice nurse had moved to Montana. His oncologist had retired. The neighbors who'd brought us casseroles and sat with Dad while I ran to the pharmacy didn't want to get involved in a family dispute. Michael had witnesses. He had friends of the family who testified that Mom had wanted to be more involved, but I'd pushed her away. He had a cousin who claimed Dad had told him he felt trapped. He even had one of Dad's old golf buddies who said I'd been controlling during Dad's last birthday party. None of them had been there. Not for the hard parts. Not for the parts that mattered. The morning of the trial, I woke up at 4 a.m. in the bedroom I'd been sleeping in for 3 years. Mom had already moved into a condo downtown with money from Dad's life insurance. She'd invited Michael to stay with her. Neither of them had spoken to me since the lawsuit was filed. I put on the only suit I owned, a gray one I'd bought for Dad's funeral. I made coffee I didn't drink. I drove to the courthouse and parked in the garage, sitting in my car for 20 minutes before I could force myself to get out. Michael and Mom were already in the courtroom when I arrived. They were sitting in the front row with Patricia Chen, their heads bent together in conversation. Michael looked exactly like he always did. Expensive suit, perfect hair, confident smile. Mom looked smaller than I remembered, wrapped in a black cardigan, even though it was warm outside. They didn't look at me when I walked in. Bernard was waiting at our table. He gave me a reassuring smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We'll be okay," he said. "The truth is on our side." But I'd learned in those 3 years of watching my father die that the truth didn't always matter. Sometimes the truth lost to the people who could afford better lawyers. Judge Sarah Morrison entered at 9 sharp. She was a woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun and reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She looked tired, like she'd seen too many families tear themselves apart over money. Patricia Chen started strong. She painted a picture of me as a manipulative daughter who'd swooped in when my father was vulnerable, who'd pushed my grieving mother aside, who'd convinced my father to disinherit his only son. She showed the court the revised will, emphasizing how drastically it differed from the original document that had split everything equally. "Gerald Hayes was dying," she said, her voice ringing through the courtroom. "He was on heavy pain medication. He was terrified and alone, and his daughter took advantage of that fear. She isolated him, controlled his access to his wife and son, and rewrote his legacy to benefit herself. Then she called Mom to the stand. My mother walked to the witness box like she was heading to her own execution. She wouldn't look at me. She kept her eyes on Patricia Chen or the judge or the floor, anywhere but at me. "Mrs. Hayes," Patricia said gently, "can you tell the court about your relationship with your daughter during your husband's illness?" Mom's voice was barely a whisper. She pushed me out. Every time I tried to help, she said I was doing it wrong. She said I was too emotional, that I was making things worse for Gerald. Eventually, she stopped letting me visit unless she was there, and even then, she monitored every conversation. It was a lie. I'd begged Mom to help. I'd called her crying at 2 in the morning when Dad was in so much pain he couldn't stop screaming. I'd asked her to sit with him for just an hour so I could go to the grocery store, and she'd said she couldn't handle seeing him like that. But standing there in court, listening to her testimony, I could see how it looked. The dutiful son working hard in California, the heartbroken wife too devastated to function, and me, the daughter who'd taken control of everything. Bernard cross-examined her, asking about specific instances when she'd refused to help. Mom cried through most of his questions, saying she couldn't remember, that it was all such a blur, that she'd been in shock. The judge looked sympathetic. Michael testified next. He talked about flying home whenever he could, about the hours he'd spent on the phone with Dad's doctors, about how he'd sent money to cover expenses because I'd told him I was handling everything else. "I trusted my sister," he said, and his voice actually broke. "I thought she was taking care of our father. I didn't realize she was taking care of herself." I wanted to stand up and scream. I wanted to show them my bank statements, the ones that proved I'd spent $23,000 of my own money on Dad's care because Michael's checks never covered everything. I wanted to show them the texts I'd sent Michael, the ones where I'd begged him to come home, where I'd told him Dad was asking for him. But Bernard had advised against introducing my phone records. He said it would look petty, that it would seem like I was trying to make Michael look bad instead of defending myself. Patricia Chen called 3 more witnesses, each one testifying that Dad had seemed confused in his final months, that I'd been present for every medical decision, that I'd been the only one in the room when he'd signed the new will. By lunch, I knew we were losing. Bernard tried. He really did. He called Dad's oncologist, who appeared via video conference, and testified that Dad had been mentally competent until his final 2 weeks. He submitted my notebooks, the ones tracking every symptom and medication. He showed the receipts proving I'd paid for everything. But it wasn't enough. We didn't have the narrative. We had facts, but they had a story, and stories are what juries and judges remember. I was supposed to testify after lunch. Bernard had prepared me for it, coached me on how to stay calm, how to explain everything without getting emotional. But as I sat in that courtroom, watching my brother and mother lie about the worst 3 years of my life, I felt something break inside me. I was going to lose. I was going to lose the house I'd grown up in, the car collection Dad had spent 40 years building, the vacation home where I'd learned to ski. I was going to lose everything, and there was nothing I could do about it. The bailiff called the court back to order at 1:30. Judge Morrison looked at Bernard. "Does the defense wish to call any additional witnesses?" Bernard glanced at me. I could see the defeat in his eyes. "Your Honor, the defense calls Rebecca Hayes." I stood up, my legs shaking. I walked to the witness box and placed my hand on the Bible, swearing to tell the truth. I sat down. I looked at my brother and my mother, and I waited for Bernard to ask his first question. That's when the courtroom door opened. Everyone turned. A woman walked in, maybe 60 years old, with gray hair cut short and a professional Navy suit. She carried a leather briefcase and moved with the kind of confidence that came from knowing exactly where you belonged. Judge Morrison frowned. "This is a closed proceeding. I'm going to have to ask you to." "Your Honor, my name is Catherine Brennan. I'm an attorney representing the estate of Gerald Hayes. I apologize for the interruption, but I have information relevant to this case." Bernard stood up. "Your Honor, I'm not aware of any other counsel associated with." "Mr. Hutchinson," Catherine said, her voice calm but firm. "You're representing Rebecca Hayes in her personal capacity. I'm representing the estate itself, and I have evidence that suggests this proceeding is based on fraudulent claims." The courtroom went silent. Patricia Chen was on her feet. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. If opposing counsel had evidence, it should have been submitted during discovery. I move to have this witness excluded." Judge Morrison held up her hand. "Miss Brennan, this is extremely unusual. How did you come to represent the estate?" Catherine opened her briefcase. "Gerald Hayes retained my services 6 months before his death, Your Honor. He asked me to monitor the situation after his passing and to intervene if anyone attempted to contest his will on false grounds. I've been investigating the claims made by Michael Hayes and Margaret Hayes for the past 3 months." She pulled out a document and handed it to the bailiff. "This is my retainer agreement with Gerald Hayes, signed and notarized. As you'll see, he specifically anticipated that his son might challenge the will, and he wanted to ensure that Rebecca's position would be protected." Michael's face had gone white. Mom was staring at Catherine like she'd seen a ghost. Judge Morrison examined the document. "This appears legitimate. Miss Chen, do you have any objection to Miss Brennan joining these proceedings?" Patricia Chen looked like she wanted to object, but she couldn't. Catherine had every right to be there. "No objection, Your Honor." "Very well." Judge Morrison looked at Catherine. "What evidence do you wish to present?" Catherine pulled out a thick folder. "Your Honor, the petitioners have claimed that Rebecca Hayes manipulated her father through isolation and undue influence. I have evidence that directly contradicts these claims." She handed a stack of papers to the bailiff, who distributed copies to the judge, Patricia Chen and Bernard. I couldn't see what they said from where I was sitting, but I watched Michael's expression change from confusion to panic. "These are phone records," Catherine said. "Specifically, Michael Hayes' phone records for the 3-year period during which his father was ill. As you can see, he received 147 phone calls from his sister during that time. He returned 11 of them." She pulled out another document. "These are text messages from Rebecca Hayes to her brother, asking him to visit, to call, to help with medical decisions. Michael Hayes responded to fewer than 10% of these messages." Bernard was staring at Catherine like she was an angel. I couldn't breathe. "Additionally," Catherine continued, "I have testimony from 6 different witnesses who can confirm that Rebecca Hayes repeatedly invited Margaret Hayes to participate in Gerald's care and that Margaret Hayes declined. 3 of these witnesses are medical professionals who observed these interactions directly." She pulled out more papers. "I also have financial records showing that Rebecca Hayes spent $23,000 of her personal savings on Gerald's medical care, while Michael Hayes sent exactly $12,000 over 3 years, despite earning a salary of over $300,000 annually." Patricia Chen stood up. "Your Honor, I fail to see how my client's financial situation is relevant to." "It's relevant," Catherine said, her voice sharp, "because your client has claimed that he fulfilled his duties as a son and that Rebecca Hayes was motivated by greed. The financial records tell a different story." She turned back to the judge. "But most importantly, Your Honor, I have video testimony from Gerald Hayes himself." The courtroom erupted. Michael was on his feet. Patricia Chen was objecting. Mom had started crying again. Judge Morrison slammed her gavel. "Order!" Everyone sit down and be quiet, or I'll clear this courtroom. The room fell silent. Catherine calmly pulled out a USB drive and handed it to the bailiff. Your Honor, with your permission, I'd like to play this video for the court. Judge Morrison looked at Patricia Chen. Objection? Patricia seemed to be struggling with what to say. Finally, she shook her head. No objection. The bailiff set up a laptop and projector. The lights dimmed slightly. And then my father's face appeared on the screen. He looked better than he had in those final weeks, which meant this was filmed maybe 8 or 9 months before he died. He was sitting in his favorite chair, the brown leather one in his study. Catherine was sitting across from him, just out of frame. Mr. Hayes, her voice said from off-screen. Can you state your full name and the date for the record? Gerald Thomas Hayes, April 14th, 2023. And are you making this statement of your own free will, without coercion or undue influence? Yes. Can you explain why you asked me to record this testimony? Dad took a breath. Even on the screen, I could see how much it cost him. I'm dying. The doctors have given me less than a year. I've made the decision to revise my will, and I know my son is going to contest it when I'm gone. I want to make sure there's no question about my mental state or my reasoning. Catherine's voice. Can you explain your reasoning for the changes you've made? Dad looked directly at the camera. 3 months ago, I was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. When I told my family, my daughter Rebecca immediately offered to move home and take care of me. She put her entire life on hold. She gave up her job, her apartment, her independence, because she didn't want me to die alone. My son Michael visited twice in the first month. He sent money, which I appreciate, but he didn't come home. Every time Rebecca called and asked him to visit, he was too busy. Work trips, his kids' activities, his wife's schedule, always an excuse. My wife Margaret couldn't handle seeing me sick. I understand that. Watching someone you love die is terrible, but Rebecca never turned away. Not once. Not when I couldn't walk. Not when I couldn't feed myself. Not when I couldn't remember her name. I'm changing my will because Rebecca has earned it. Not through manipulation, not through isolation, through sacrifice, through love, through being there when it was hard and ugly and thankless. Michael will say he was there in the ways he could be. Margaret will say she was too devastated to help, and maybe that's true for them. But Rebecca was there in every way, every day, and I want to make sure she's taken care of when I'm gone. He paused, looking tired. If you're watching this, Rebecca, it means I'm gone, and your brother is fighting you. Don't let him win. You earned every penny. You earned that house. You earned those cars I spent 40 years restoring because I wanted to leave something behind, and I can't think of anyone I'd rather leave them to. And Michael, if you're watching this, I love you. I've always loved you. But you weren't there. You made your choice, and now you have to live with it. Don't punish your sister because you're feeling guilty. The video ended. The screen went black. The lights came back up. I was crying. I couldn't help it. Hearing his voice again, seeing his face, knowing he'd planned all of this to protect me, it broke something open that I'd been holding closed for 6 months. Judge Morrison cleared her throat. Her expression had changed. She looked at Michael with something approaching contempt. Miss Chen, does your client wish to continue with this proceeding? Patricia Chen and Michael had a whispered conversation. I could see him shaking his head, could see her pointing at something in her notes. Finally, Michael stood up. Your Honor, I'd like to withdraw the petition. I'm sorry, Mr. Hayes. I don't think I heard you correctly. Michael's voice was louder this time, but hollow. I withdraw the petition to contest the will. Judge Morrison nodded slowly. Very well. The petition is dismissed. The will of Gerald Hayes will be executed as written. She looked at me. Miss Hayes, you're free to go. I stood up on shaking legs. Bernard was grinning, actually grinning, pumping Catherine's hand. Catherine walked over to me and put a hand on my shoulder. Your father was very clear about what he wanted, she said quietly. I'm sorry I couldn't intervene sooner, but I needed to see what claims they were making before I could refute them. How did he even know to contact you? We met through a mutual friend about a year before he got sick. He told me then that he was worried about what would happen after he died, that he knew Michael had a temper and your mother was easily influenced. He asked me to keep an eye on things. I agreed. I turned around. Michael and Mom were leaving through the back door of the courtroom. Michael didn't look at me. Mom did, just once. And I saw something in her expression that might have been shame. Patricia Chen stopped at our table. For what it's worth, she said to me, I'm sorry. I should have investigated before taking this case. She left. Bernard excused himself to file paperwork. And then it was just me and Catherine in the empty courtroom. What happens now? I asked. Now you go home. You grieve your father. You figure out what you want to do with the rest of your life. You rebuild what you gave up. What if I don't know how? Catherine smiled. It was a kind smile, the smile of someone who'd seen a lot of people lose things and found them again. Then you start small, one day at a time. That's all your father wanted for you, the chance to start over. I went back to the house that afternoon. Dad's house. My house. I walked through the rooms that still smelled like his aftershave and his coffee and his life. I went to his study and sat in that brown leather chair and cried for 2 hours straight. 6 months later, I'm still figuring it out. I got my nursing license renewed. I'm working part-time at a clinic near the house. I've been going through Dad's car collection, trying to decide which ones to keep and which ones to sell. The Aspen property I'm keeping. It's where I feel closest to him. Michael sent an email 3 weeks after the trial. It was short. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I am. I haven't responded. I don't know if I will. Mom calls sometimes. We don't talk about the trial. We talk about the weather and her book club and safe things that don't hurt. Maybe someday we'll be able to talk about the real things. Maybe not. Catherine Brennan and I have lunch once a month. She won't let me pay her, says Dad already took care of it. She tells me stories about him, about their meetings, about how proud he was of me. It helps. Last week, I was cleaning out Dad's desk and found another letter. This one wasn't sealed, wasn't addressed to anyone in particular. It was dated 2 weeks before he died, written in shaky handwriting that was barely legible. Rebecca, it said, if you're reading this, you made it through. I knew you would. You're the strongest person I know. Don't spend too much time being angry at your brother. He's weak, not evil. Don't waste energy hating your mother. She's scared, not cruel. But don't let them back in until they've earned it. You've earned your peace. Take it. Love, Dad. I framed that letter. It's hanging in my bedroom now, right next to a photo of Dad and me from that last summer in Aspen, both of us laughing at something I can't remember anymore. The house is quiet now. It's just me and Dad's dog, Murphy, who's 14 and going blind, but still waits by the door every evening like Dad might walk through it. I keep Dad's study exactly how he left it. Sometimes I sit in there and read or work on my laptop, and I swear I can feel him there with me, proud that I didn't give up. I don't know what the future looks like. I don't know if I'll ever have a real relationship with my family again. I don't know if I'll stay in Denver or sell everything and start completely fresh somewhere else. But I know I fought for what was mine. I know my father saw me, really saw me, and knew what I'd sacrificed. And I know that whatever comes next, I built it on a foundation of truth, not lies. That's enough. For now, that's enough.